Dirty Moderates, thank you for joining us. This is the Friday before the week of Thanksgiving, and we're about 6 weeks since the worst pogrom enacted against Jews since the Holocaust on October 7th, and I thought that we would do an episode on Israel specifically and the crisis from 30,000 feet. Both of my guests have joined us before. You're both very popular with our listeners. We've got Ethan Chorin yet again, whose book on Benghazi is a must-read, and whose scholarly insight, I think, in the Middle East and specifically the Arab world is invaluable. And Dara Horn, a celebrated author. If you haven't read People Love Dead Jews, you have to read it. But she is a very important voice at this time, and actually recently wrote a really emotionally shattering essay, I would say, in the New York Times, which is what I'd like to actually begin with, if we might. So welcome both of you back to Dirty Moderate for this little mini salon on Israel, if you will. The essay appeared on October 22nd. It's called "Why Jews Cannot Stop Shaking Right Now." Must read. And here's a quote from it, but please read the whole essay. I'm not even talking about the Holocaust, which several of last week's oldest escapees and victims also endured. Far more Jews were killed on October 7th than on Kristallnacht. No, I'm thinking of the Farhud pogrom in 1941 Baghdad, a 2-day rampage in which hundreds of Jews were raped, tortured, and murdered. Thinking of the pogroms of 1918 to 1921 in Ukraine, in which an estimated 100,000 Jews were slaughtered in organized massacres reminiscent of this month's attack. For diaspora Jews, the recent attacks were not distant overseas events. As was true in ancient times, the ties between global Jewish communities in Israel are concrete, specific, intimate, and personal. My New Jersey Jewish Federation has institutional ties with the southern Israeli town of Ofakim and its surrounding communities, sharing annual homestays with a place whose death toll from the attacks already exceeds that of the notorious Kishinev pogrom of 1903, in which 49 Jews were murdered. So, Dara, obviously you wrote this not long after the attacks. Things seem to be worse. And not just because the day after the attack, the essay did a pro-Hamas rally in Times Square. We seem to be descending and tumbling toward hell. You want to start?
You've made it so much fun. Thank you.
Well, as I said to Dara before, I wish I was seeing you again. I so enjoyed our time when you last appeared 2 years ago, but these are not the circumstances I want to see you again in. But again, you're here for good reason. So take it away.
Well, so yeah, I mean, I wrote this piece really just in response to the attacks on October 7th. It wasn't really in response to the horrifying response to these attacks around the world, which have really continued into this, truly and openly anti-Semitic hate fest. At the time when I wrote this piece, I think, it was just sort of starting to notice, various institutions and organizations, posting obtuse statements online about this and, not really acknowledging it. This is escalated. I probably don't have to tell your listeners about the kinds of attacks and violence that has been unleashed against Jewish communities in lots of places around the world, and certainly here in the United States. I think that what's interesting to me about this is there's this sort of through line which I was sort of starting to get at in that piece in the Times. There's a through line of anti-Semitism that runs since ancient times. And that through line is this denial of Jewish identity and experience. And part of that, and also this sort of celebration of the destruction of Jews. And one of the things I was trying to get in that piece was really how, not just that this was this attack on the Jewish community, but also how gleeful it was. How much people really obviously enjoyed it. And, you see that with, these Hamas attackers who were filming things with the GoPro cameras and, posting it online and, calling their parents to celebrate and this sort of thing. And I trace that back through other instances throughout history where you have that same kind of gleefulness. What I think really shocked a lot of people was how you see that gleefulness even in the response to the attack in the West, and including in the United States. And when I say there's this through line of this denial of Jewish experience, part of that has also been sort of that sort of the hatefulness of the response, which is so much of which is based on a denial that what's happening is happening. So this is really just this irrepressible rage of people who are, are responding, and this is some sort of resistance movement to Israeli policies. That's not what Hamas says it is. Hamas is super clear. Their goal is to eliminate the Jews, right? I mean, they're not pretending that this is about some response to some Israeli policy. So that sort of denial, also this sort of whole trope that is certainly not new at this point, but has, been, true for a long time among some, in some circles about how, Israel is some sort of, white supremacist, settler colonialist state, and we're going to just pretend that, there's no Jewish history in Israel, even though Jewish civilization is indigenous to Israel. We're just going to pretend that that's not true. So like this sort of denial is similar to Holocaust denial, right? I mean, and it's part of that same idea of, we take whatever Jews say happened and we deny it and pretend it never happened. And so you find yourself constantly pushing back, not only, physical defense, but you find yourself pushing back against just outright lies. And I think that's been really, really shocking to a lot of people in the Jewish community in the United States.
Yeah. Ethan, you and I have had some discussions about sort of the very, very fraught trajectory of the peace process, right? And its woes and its problems. And, I have to say for the record, though, I'm such an ardent Zionist, and I don't actually think there are both sides, especially now. I do actually believe in my utopian little brain, which is rare because I don't have much of a utopian brain. I'm pretty pessimistic about human nature, that a self-determining Palestinian state would be great. Like one that was offered by Bill Clinton, that was rejected by Arafat, that was rejected 7 or 8 times. I've lost track, even during the Peel Commission in the 30s. Ethan, do you think, and I bring this to you for a specific reason, because I think you study this from a different angle. I mean, how is there a viable context to discuss any kind of peace process in, when I think, to Dara's point, there's a brackish, diluted narrative about Jewish identity and Jewish humanity and Jewish lives. Do you know what I mean? I mean, how does Israel pick up, and they should rout Hamas and will, and then say, well, we're not going to occupy Gaza, but let's try to do something here. Do something with who?
Well, part of the big sort of paradox here is that what happens at the end of so Israel has invaded. If ultimately there is a state, a peace process that leads to a state, does this confirm the proposition that immoral acts will benefit someone? Whereas, I would argue that essentially the Israel-Palestinian problem has been neglected for years, at least certainly by the United States. I think the Emirates had a very interesting approach, and I think there was a lot of possibilities there, particularly with as per a possible rapprochement with Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. And there's a sort of a logical argument for that sort of broader Arab sort of embrace is not quite the right word, but essentially taking a more gradualist approach to peace and making the Israelis feel a bit more comfortable and providing them incentives to and the Palestinians incentives to work together through actual direct contact. I must say, so ultimately, in my view, is there has to be a two-state solution. If there's not, then of course the progressive Netanyahu governments have done is essentially enable a vision of Israel in which there is a faster growing minority of Arabs within the. It's no longer a Jewish state, essentially, which I think is. There are all kinds of paradoxes and contradictions in Israeli policy in the last. Since certainly Rabin's death, assassination. So I don't know, just to take us. So, like you, I would like to see ultimately, I think there's no avoiding or no having a peaceful coexistence without the Palestinians having their own state. So how we get there, it's interesting. The events of the last 40 plus days have either made it more likely or less likely. And if you look at the headlines of various op-eds and things, you have people doomsaying and scrolling on both sides of this. So it's not exactly clear. I mean, what I would, just to take a sort of a step back of where I position myself, I think that obviously the attack on 10/7 was devastating. I think it was designed in order to, its authors wanted an irrational, emotional, transgenerational trauma response. And the reason I was against an Israeli invasion of Gaza was that I thought that that's exactly the response that they wanted, and that one of the results of this was going to be a Biden administration that felt pressed against the wall to support Israel, and a convergence on the extreme left of Israel and the United States opening themselves up to criticism in a situation where you can't. It's almost unavoidable. You've got this constituency that is ready to jump, and they've done it, and they continue to do it. And I think there's another issue here, which is that of the question of who created Hamas. And I think this is a moral. Hamas. On both sides of the conflict, you've got politics and the United States. Essentially, what I see playing out here is a series of systemic failures that have collided and produced this almost Greek tragedy, which no one can get out of. So while I'm immensely sympathetic, I've lived in Israel for a time. I have some relatives there. I'm half Jewish. The wrong half. I'm immensely, I have relatives who survived the Holocaust, etc. I cannot be more empathetic and personally just distraught by what happened. At the same time, I think the Netanyahu government has been an absolute disaster, morally and otherwise. I think that Hamas, you have to look, people are in this social media age have become used to being baited, and everything is designed to bait people, right? But if you look at just simply, and I just toss this out there, and I'm sorry for going over my limit here, but you have to ask the question, who created Hamas? The Netanyahu government obviously preferred and has openly stated that it preferred to essentially support Hamas in order to undermine the Palestinian Authority, which it didn't. So it could essentially promote its policies in the West Bank, which are morally unacceptable. The Qataris were brought in 2018 by the United States with Israel's approval to provide aid to Hamas. Much of it was humanitarian, but other parts of it were military and other provisions. So Iran, you have rather credible reports that some hundreds of Hamas fighters that participated in this atrocity were trained in Iran within the last year. How does this happen? Of course, they probably came through the Rafah crossing in Egypt, which means that there must have been multiple parties that understood this was going on. And the vaunted Israeli intelligence presumably has been distracted by all of the domestic conflict within Israel, which essentially, in some ways is very similar to the 1973 attack. Israel is divided internally, and that division has caused vulnerability. So if you add up all these various states and the policies of the Netanyahu government, which have been essentially to preserve itself. I mean, Netanyahu has been, the things that he's done are, when it boils down to it, all enabling his own escape from being held accountable by the Israeli public for other actions which compromise the security of the Israeli state. So you have to put Israel's response in that to Hamas in that context. I think we're giving Hamas too much credit here. I'll leave it at that.
Dara, before you respond, I want to say this to both of you. I take your point, Ethan, and I think you know that. I think you and I have had several conversations about this. But I think it's very difficult to analyze. Forget just being a statesman, a diplomat, or a politician. As a Jew, that somehow the moment of October 7th could ever be decontextualized from 75 years. Let's just use that since Israel was created, of Israel being in a posture of complete self-defense. What I mean is that Yasser Arafat, right, and the PLO never had any intention of agreeing to any kind of Palestinian state, certainly after 1967. The creation of Israel was fraught with a war where Arab armies attacked it. Of course, Israel does now have peace with Egypt, Jordan, and the UAE and Bahrain. But though this attack was so vicious, and as Dara wrote, more Jews were killed than on Kristallnacht, how is this any different than this trajectory of violence? And Dara, I'm turning to you on this. In the sense, I'm not asking for a defense of the Netanyahu government. I'm not even saying you're wrong on that, Ethan. I'm just saying, what's really different? We're still at the stalemate where Palestinians have turned down a state again and again and again from bipartisan administrations. And so do Palestinians have no agency? I'm just trying to understand why this is all contextualized in this way when I don't think it can be, because I think that decontextualizes it from the larger existential we want dead Jews. Dara. Oh, sorry. Well, let Dara answer, Ethan, and then...
I was thinking maybe I should let Ethan respond because I'm curious what he's going to say to that, too.
Well, if you asked whether Palestinians have agency, I think what's going on here is that on multiple levels, the governance is failing its people. Palestinians are not uniformly monsters. No. Israelis are not uniformly monsters. Americans generally have, I think, want to do good, but in this, and this is one of my points of the central thesis of the book we talked about before on Benghazi, was that essentially the politics has become so partisan rich, so polarized, that that governments themselves, even if they have good intentions, are, and I'm not making any, I'm talking about the United States here, but there are some parallels elsewhere, is that there's no independent thought. It's everything is designed to battle off the opposition internally and essentially promote a very two-dimensional foreign policy. I would say that, yes, the Palestinians have absolutely been completely and utterly failed by their leadership for ages and ages. They've also been at the center of all kinds of regional machinations, just as Israel has. Mm-hmm. So, I almost feel like there's sort of there's an aspect of sort of Greek tragedy to this, where there's almost as if, I don't think that Biden has full control over what he can do politically. He's worried about the radical left coming out of dragging him down when we've got Trump lurking in the wings. So he's constrained by his own political situation. And the Israelis are also, you've got Netanyahu, who has his own very sort of idiosyncratic situation, which has led to a government that is, a very large number of Israelis and Jews object to very strongly. I don't know what you can say other than you can't. I think both. It's interesting that the whole notion of anti-Semitism, I think, is symbolic, because the term anti-Semite and Semitism obviously comes from Shem, the son of Noah, which right. is recognized as, of course, the common ancestor of Arabs and Jews. So to call for for a conflict around Arabs and Jews to one side to call the other to focus. There should be another term basically for this.
Well, we can call it Jew hatred. Anti-Semitism is the acceptable. It's just the way but we mean Jew hatred is what we mean.
But I think it's symbolic of the fact that here you have two populations which feel aggrieved for different reasons. Getting into I think the Oslo Accords were essentially based on the acceptance, whether they were actually signed or not. Right. That here you have two peoples, regardless of, there are good reasons to go. Lots of people have studied the historical roots, but what's going on in the present? You have two populations that have to find a way to exist together. So in some ways going back and saying, well, the Palestinians were actually Egyptians that took advantage of a mandatory pull to populate, to take advantage of certain benefits and aren't actually the original. I think in this context, it's simply, that's not the salient question. The question is, how do we get out of this, this dilemma in which you've got people dying in horrible ways on both sides, and no one can stop it.
Okay, Dara. No. I agree. I just want to get Dara in, Ethan.
So to go to what you said. As you said, it's difficult to analyze this context, so to speak, right? And this is often what we hear, from people who are used to sort of thinking about this in a sort of geopolitical, let's all play four-dimensional chess kind of way. Right. It is very hard to hear this. Sorry. Well, that's what I'm saying is I don't think that's what's happening here. When I hear about what about Netanyahu, et cetera, I have nothing nice to say about Netanyahu. But whenever I hear these kinds of questions of let's talk about the context, what I'm hearing...
I'm saying not about certain context. Okay. Certain context is relevant. If you've got a government that's actually helped create Hamas, you have to take into account, this has been done for selfish personal reasons, essentially when it comes down to it. And I would just posit that has some moral dimension when you're talking about what is a response. I mean, you had...
Okay. What I hear when I hear this kind of argument...
Just one second. I thought Thomas... I don't always agree with Thomas Friedman, but I respect him. I actually had a course with him at one point. I thought his piece before... Why Israel should not invade Gaza was absolutely spot on. It's just simply there's nothing positive to come from it. And this is completely separate from the fact that atrocity was bound to excite and the absolute deepest revulsion of Jews everywhere. I mean, there's nothing, but that's political. Okay.
So I just want to get Dara. Let's let Dara just respond to these points. I really want to.
Yeah. So we made the comparison to the Yom Kippur War, which a lot of people have made because surprise attack, etc. No civilians were killed in the Yom Kippur War. Just want to put that out there. No civilians were killed in the Yom Kippur War. This was, and it's not to say this is the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. It's not just how many people died; it's the obvious sadism, and that was the purpose. And to hear people talk about Netanyahu, etc. This is how I would respond to that. What is the one intelligent thing I saw someone post online about this after all these arguments about Netanyahu blah 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 was. But what was Israel wearing? Because that's essentially what we're talking about. What was Israel wearing? And I have to say, this has been a common thread in anti-Semitism for thousands of years, is what did the Jews do to deserve it? Let's talk about it. Let's go there. Let's talk about, and the people who are attacking the Jews, as Adam, you suggested, you're like, well, did these people have no agency? Okay, sure. It's all this solipsistic planet where it's the Jews must have done something to deserve this. And I have to say that, this is what I think is interesting about that.
Is not becoming of Jews, and it's not becoming of Palestinians either, or the radical left. Here we want to have a rational discussion about what to do about what's going on. We had a horrible atrocity committed against Jews. I think that was a political act. It was designed. I mean, the people who promoted it were absolutely morally. I mean, there's no difference between them and bin Laden. Okay, the United States responded to bin Laden. We know how that played out. basically now the United States has lost influence in the world. It is now.
Okay.
Why do we want to enable this?
Here's the difference between the United States response to bin Laden is not like camped out on the borders of the United States.
Yes, it doesn't matter whether he was camped
well, no,
out.
I think it does matter, because then it's like if you don't I don't understand what the alternative is, because otherwise you're basically saying, like, why don't the Israelis just lay down and die? And what
what isn't the citizens? I think it's absolutely. I actually think it's absolutely necessary for the hostages of the Hatufim, the kidnapped people, to get those people back. And I think that the Israeli action and responding in the way that it did, which served political purpose, it was a political act that generated a political response. And now you've got everybody in the world magnifying their emotions through Twitter. And what has Israel gained from all of this? I mean, take the 2021 Hamas attack against Israel. Essentially, everybody that was involved in that attack was killed by the Israelis. There was no invasion, and Gaza
Hamas stayed in power and was able to regroup and to do this a year and a half later
through support of various actors, which nobody was paying attention to.
I mean, there's no dispute that this was a huge intelligence failure. That's for sure.
No, it's not just a failure; it was on purpose. The Netanyahu government is concerned about staying in power. He enabled a far-right coalition to come in and basically divide.
I have nothing good to say about Netanyahu. And I have great news. He's not going to stay in power after this.
Right.
Great.
I mean, Golda Meir. Hold on. Golda Meir was defeated after the Yom Kippur War.
Great news. Netanyahu's gone, and I will be happy to see him go.
From a strategy perspective, what has Israel gained? They probably lost a piece with Saudi Arabia. They've got an infinite amount of, as you call it, anti-Semitic protests. So has Biden. Everybody's in a.
Okay. I need to stop you there. The anti-Semitic protest began before the blood was dry in these southern Israeli communities.
Do I think that anti-Semitism? Hold on a second. Do I think that anti-Semitism exists?
A single bomb on Gaza. No, that's not the reason. Again, what was Israel wearing? What were the Jews wearing?
No, I'm sorry. I think part of the problem here is that people are so wedded to their own narratives that they cannot cross to the other side to put themselves in the other people's shoes. You know, there's absolutely you wrote a beautiful piece for the New York Times, and in that piece you challenged, I think, if I recall, Jews and Israelis to think creatively and in a resilient fashion about what to do, how to preserve themselves. The way to do that is not to walk into a disaster that's going to attract such all of that rancor to themselves and lose all of the possibility of having an actual secure relationship with its Arab neighbors. I'm just looking at this as a utilitarian question, not I'm denying what happened. The act that was all the GoPros, everything you mentioned, all of that stuff was designed to activate, as you call it, what was it, a transgenerational trauma, which I completely agree.
I think it was actually designed to kill Jews.
Yes, of course, it's both.
Yeah,
they wanted the Israelis to come in and do. They wanted the Israelis to come in and essentially at that point, but Netanyahu was not strong enough to have one view or other. But the ideal situation was not to be baited and then find oneself in a trap where now Netanyahu every other day is saying, well, do we occupy this land or do we what do we do? He had there's no plan for what comes next. This is just going to lead to more of it.
Right. Okay. Let me just say this though. Okay. I want to, if we can, for the purposes and both of you are, I like passionate debate. It's important, but it's very difficult. Okay. To separate, I think, and Ethan, you're half Jewish, so I think you agree with this. So I'm putting words in your mouth. I'm sorry, but I know Dara is going to agree with me. To watch the world when it comes to Israel and the Jews make a lot of and, but, if excuses that are not made for any other marginalized group. And you know it. If the KKK Junior decided are going to rally at all college campuses now, you would see okay, the hacks at MSNBC, so I'm calling them that for a reason, the liars at CNN, okay, because they're so busy attacking everyone who's ever said anything bad in the world about any marginalized group, condemning this and calling for boycotts and all of that. My point is that this has definitely touched a nerve for me and for so many others. And Ethan, nothing you said, I don't think anything you said is incorrect about the geopolitical morass. But I do think that the geopolitical morass is what it is and has always been a geopolitical morass. And Jews yet are less, well, Jews are less safe today, you could argue, but not because Israel responded, but because Hamas did what they did. And before a bomb was dropped, a rally of people devoted to justice, the Democratic Socialists of America, who are absolute vile people, in my opinion, for other reasons, but literally had a pro-Hamas rally. And 54% of Harvard-Harris poll, 54% of 18 to 34-year-olds say Hamas was justified. What I'm saying is we can't change right now social media. I mean, TikTok has been a disaster. There's been all these things. But in the context that we're in, you know, no matter what Israel does, which, by the way, huge distinction, and you have to agree with this, is Israel, war kills civilians. 9 million Germans were killed in World War II. Does that mean we don't fight Hitler? I mean, you know, this discussion becomes very, no. But what I'm saying is, hold on, I'm going to let everybody respond. In this context, Israel tries its darned God-given best to avoid civilian casualties. They just do. Hamas makes it much harder. And I'm sorry, Hamas, driven by Islamic fanaticism, is a death cult.
Yes.
So okay. So we have to be able to say these things.
I agree 100% with what you're saying.
No, and I know you're not. I'm just trying to say for the audience too. So listeners. Yeah. So it's
whether it's a good idea. I mean, look, anti-Semitism exists. It's obviously it's a huge problem in Europe these days. It's on the rise. I think the problem in the United States is you have a politically charged, uninformed younger generation that is willing to essentially latch on to any cause that and essentially hook their own cause to any underdog that they can find, and are tossing out words like genocide and ethnic cleansing and everything else as if they're candy, when these things have a very specific meaning. Yeah. And I think that, you know, as has been well documented, college campuses are essentially have become undisciplined. I don't know. I am certainly not a fan of radical campus. Either the people should have the right to speak their mind and speak it freely, and people should be able to disagree with other people, and that's what college is for. Unfortunately, it's become a cesspool of.
And Dara, I'm going to
put it in that.
There's a lot. Well, Dara, I want to hear what you say, but I want to say something. The three of us are Ivy League educated people, okay? And the majority of humanities departments at those schools, okay, I didn't know this was the remit, is that we're now going to see the world through Michel Foucault and Edward Said, okay? And and postmodernists, and I read all this stuff, postmodernist garbage, angry Marxist people who can't get over the fact that their ideology just doesn't work. No, I mean, I'm serious. Scholarly people who put this in the name and in literally indoctrinate their students in the world of the oppressed, the oppressor, the power dynamic. Michel Foucault wrote only about power. So, I mean, what I'm saying is the three of us know this. We are not rubes sitting here going, well, we can't understand why this happened. You know, we all have Tony, educations, right? Elite educations. Dara, why are college campuses incubating this?
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot to be said here. I think that what you just touched on is sort of, the way that these, conversations about social justice and that sort of thing have been framed on college campuses. And I've encountered this in other situations too, because I've gotten to speak about DEI. I've been like the DEI speaker of corporations and at college campuses. Yes. And I will tell you, and what I always do is when I go in to speak about this is I say, here's the problem with when you're talking about anti-Semitism and DEI. So that kind of, and I'm using DEI as a shorthand for sort of this whole sort of welter of beliefs about, oppressor, oppressed, and that kind of dynamic. Those kinds of, that kind of discourse is set up to try to combat social prejudice. And social prejudice is the idea that there's this group of people who you believe are inferior to you. Here's the problem. Anti-Semitism isn't a social prejudice. It's a conspiracy theory. And a conspiracy theory is the opposite of a social prejudice, because it's not, I think these people are inferior to me. It's, I think these people are superior to me. They're supervillains who are controlling things behind the scenes. And if your worldview is that, there's this hierarchy of power in our society, and that there's these elites that are manipulating things behind the scenes, that have too much power, too much privilege, and they're overrepresented, and our job is to level the playing field. I mean, there may be some merit to that point of view. I mean, I think it's funny when I'm asked to go do DEI for Google's worldwide employees, and I'm like, we're talking about, disadvantages in power. I'm like, maybe, Google, maybe you're the problem. But what the problem with that worldview is, if that's your worldview, it's almost inevitable that you're going to fall face first into anti-Semitism, because the core anti-Semitic conspiracy theory is Jews have too much power, Jews have too much privilege, Jews are overrepresented. I mean, this is ancient, this idea. So they'll sort of that
Jews are white.
Yeah. So, okay. So then so that's part of it, is that there's this whole discourse that is in a lot of different progressive circles, including in a lot of university campuses, that is set up in this way that really makes it almost impossible for people to understand anti-Semitism. And also impossible for them to understand Jewish identity, because the whole point of this identity politics is you're putting people into certain boxes, like, race or religion and nationality. Jews predate all of those boxes. Jews predate the modern concept of race, predate the concept of religion, predate the concept of nationality. It's like every non-Jewish society wants to put Jews into the identity boxes they know best, but Jews predate the box. So it sort of becomes impossible to talk about Jews as in this identity category that's set up in a sense to exclude them. So that's one problem. But there's actually a little bit of a deeper layer to this. I don't know if either of you were listened into the congressional testimony on Wednesday.
I heard one girl was somebody Steinberg was really enthralling. I don't remember her first name.
Well, so there were a number of speakers. But one of the speakers was someone named Jonathan Schanzer from Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. And he was presenting research that his organization had done that was about shell companies or shell 501c3s that are essentially run by Hamas in the United States. And he has, you could go back and look at his testimony. I don't want to misstate what he said, but there's this whole paper trail. There used to be, it was a couple decades ago, there were charities like Holy Land Foundation that were, they used to advertise like in the back of the New York Times, like, help a child in the Holy Land. And it was, Treasury Department shut this down. People went to prison because they were funneling money to Hamas. I mean, so this was like, in the 90s. And then, there were subsequent reiterations of those organizations. And he traces, in his testimony, if you look at the written record, he sort of traces all this. He finds that, the people who didn't go to prison, there are these unindicted co-conspirators who then opened this other corporation, other 501c3. The most recent one is something called American Muslims for Palestine, which is a reconstitution of these other earlier 501c3s that are essentially front for Hamas in the United States.
Is this repeated Talib's Amen Corner? Who are these people?
I don't know. I'm not making that. No, they founded the American Muslims for Palestine. This is according to his testimony. This is not, this is what he said in Congress. They also founded Students for Justice in Palestine, which is a national organization that's at a couple hundred colleges around the country. And they're basically saying that this is run by this organization that is basically a presence of Hamas in the United States. So, this is, highly disturbing. You can sort of trace back, and it's amazing because it's actually not that hard. If you look up this organization, American Muslims for Palestine, like it's in their annual reports. I was just like looking it up on Google. Like I'm not the FBI, and it was very easy to see how they're running these trips and things and sponsoring events and campuses. So my only point being that I'm not saying that all these kids who are protesting are like Hamas operatives. That's not at all what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that it's very clear that parties sympathetic to Hamas, to say the very, very least, have taken advantage of this climate to, sort of dupe people in a sense into thinking that this is sort of these spontaneous, students are just, rising up in favor of whatever. And it's actually sort of something that's been cultivated for a lot of years with influence from people who are, at the very least sympathetic to Hamas, and certainly have ties to Hamas. So I thought that was sort of, to me, was the most interesting thing that came out of that testimony. I mean, in addition to sort of, obviously Jewish kids on campus who are getting death threats, which has become like basically the norm on a lot of college campuses.
If you step back, this is where geopolitics comes. First of all, you're talking about minorities within the United States, and a very specific conflict where social media is used to not only polarize the partisans of those minority groups, but to generate even more uninformed hate. But it works. The flows can go right and left. I don't want to find myself arguing against the existence of anti-Semitism. It's clearly a.
By the way, and let me just say one thing: I yield to nobody in my disdain for Trumpism or the threat to the authoritarian right. But an asymmetry, well, maybe I used to think it was an asymmetry in hate on one side to the other, does not mean we can't talk about it. Well, you know what I'm saying? In other words, just because Trump and there's a fanaticism there doesn't mean that there isn't. I'm not saying this to you, Ethan. I'm just saying this to the listeners. Doesn't mean deep, ingrained left-wing anti-Semitism isn't a threat. Does that make sense? I mean, everything isn't a both sides equal argument. I hate that because it shuts down this fact that there's poison coming that's poisoning a generation who identify with a more progressive politics. Is that fair?
And I think that is basically one of the big. I don't disagree with that. Right. I think one of the major problems here is that social media in general has enabled different groups that have hateful agendas to amplify those views and find more supporters. There's absolutely no issue with that. I think the focus here. I mean, you can without contextual or trying to contextualize, and I'm certainly not. I think context is helpful and unhelpful. I think the fact that the attack was on 10/7 was deeply. I think you both know what I mean. Deeply, not even. There's not words to describe it. That's one thing. But how to deal with the issue of not promoting anti-Semitism, if we want to call it, and again, I'm coming at things from the policy standpoint. Yes. I simply don't. I thought it was absolutely predictable. The United States paid a huge price for its reaction to 9/11, and I know it's not infused with the same degree of hatred, but it's not altogether dissimilar. And what I'm arguing here is that, and in response to your op-ed, Dara, I think that the constructive that Jews need to look at themselves in a way that is to imagine different futures rather than just like Palestinians need to. I mean, Hamas breeds on hatred. The settler organizations and the far right groups feed on hatred. These are all politically motivated groups whose existence depends on being fed by other hatreds. So you have to interrupt that process. And there are plenty of Jews that I know and Israelis who have devoted their entire lives to trying, and with success, to essentially bridging those divides. And a
lot of them were murdered. That was the amazing thing about that attack, is that those kibbutzim.
And so what? So you're going to condemn the people who are kidnapped for actually being sympathetic to? I know I have several friends who are Gazans. They are some of the most. You're basically saying that all Palestinians are evil.
Oh, I've not at all. What I'm saying is
that comment is essentially by saying that essentially one cannot, that Israelis should be shamed for having reached their hands out to the other side.
Didn't say that at all.
But that's the implication.
You were putting words in my mouth. That's not what I said.
I think that
is not what I said. No, what I'm saying is
Israelis should be looking at themselves. Israelis should be looking at themselves at this point and saying, why did we elect this person so many times? Forget the problems of Hamas, and that's their problem. You know, the Arab world has a litany of structural and political problems that they need to own up to and deal with. But the Israelis do too. Netanyahu has not been a friend to Israel. I think he's basically pushed Israel over a chasm, and will probably, if Israel is destroyed, it will be because of its own problems, not because of Hamas.
I agree that that Netanyahu is a disaster. And
it's not only a disaster. I think you're just as the 10/7 was an emotionally destructive, evocative, horrible event. What has been happening on the Israeli political scene for the last 20 plus years is equally disgusting. And that's it. And I don't see any point in trying to compare one or the other. Or saying you can't.
I'm a little disturbed that you put words in my mouth to suggest that I'm saying anything about the Palestinian people.
I'm just telling you that I'm saying that there are plenty of people out there on both sides, decent people who want to get along and are forced into this unworkable situation by their governments.
I agree with you. We're on the same page. We're on the same page.
The moment that attack took place, and took full responsibility and done everything he could to get the hostages back, and then dealt with Hamas later. That's my position.
I think that we're disagreeing on strategy or tactics, rather than on the idea. I feel that.
Can I just generate a little more
hostage by Hamas? At this point.
Let me. Sorry, I just want to, as a moderator, generate a little more light than heat. Ethan, I understand what Dara was saying. Sorry, I was talking to my friend Tara right before this. What Dara was saying, what I understood it to mean is that you cited in her editorial Jews having creative ways to think differently and theoretically, right, kind of build a bridge, try to find a workable solution. And what Dara was saying was it was the very left-leaning, peace-oriented kibbutzim that were attacked and murdered, people who went into Gaza and carried water and did all these humanitarian things, and they were still killed. And they were targeted for, well, hold on. They were targeted for that reason. So,
they were. There was a mixture of things. It's not like all of those people moved to the border of Gaza in order to facilitate.
No. But Hamas knew. Yes, I'm not disagreeing. Their intelligence, but Hamas knew.
Sure, of course, absolutely.
People who, because the idea from Hamas's standpoint, which I know we don't have to keep repeating, is they want the death of Jews. I understand, but what she's saying was. What I'm saying is,
it's ironic to say the least. But these people are also.
That wasn't the point I was making. It was not that it's ironic. My point was that I'm saying that these people, in other words, it wasn't it wasn't because they didn't do enough for their Gazan neighbors.
Right.
That way, you don't think it was irrelevant.
These are the same people who are protesting against. Sarah Netanyahu just came out the other day and blamed the pro-democracy protesters for the attack. Now, this is the same, these people, the families of the hostages are the ones who are actually most ardently calling for some kind of a reasonable both accountability on the domestic side and a reasonable response to the attack. Once Netanyahu, I've let you speak as well. Once Netanyahu decided to go into Gaza, essentially all of the mechanisms were under what you can't. Essentially, my position on that is he has to fight for maximum advantage for negotiations for the hostages, if nothing else, and all of this other stuff about. Of course, there are going to be horrible civilian deaths. I didn't agree with the decision to go into Gaza because I felt like essentially Israel was. Losing many advantages that would be helpful to it, while not gaining any kind of any objective that couldn't be handled another way.
Yes, this is a question of strategy or something like that. But what I want to point out is that Netanyahu is going to be out of power after this is over. There's zero question about that. The question is whether Hamas will remain in power.
Well, I know. I don't think there's any. The problem is,
because he's going to be there will be an election, and he will be out of power with an election.
Right, but
There's
the
never
problem
going
is
to be
these
an election
conflicts.
that's going to take Hamas out of power.
The problem
This
is
is the
that
problem.
these conflicts tend to breed, and I've seen this God knows how many times. I mean, no one has cried about the conflict in Yemen, in which 600,000 civilians, women and children have been killed.
Well, I've invoked it regularly. Is where were the marches for dead Syrians and dead Yemen? Where are they?
Yeah, well, but people have a very selective focus, right? Everybody wants to focus on the things that matter to them
Yes,
most.
but why when Muslims regularly massacre other Muslims? I'm not being stereotypical. They just do in that region of the world. Why are there not marches about that?
Okay, that's a whole nother. My question there is whether American policy aggravated that situation and created
and I'm going to come back, and I want to ask you something else though on this point. I'm not saying you. None of this. I'm saying you endorse. I'm just saying it's difficult to have a conversation about it not being fundamentally about the mass murder of Jews on a regular basis if they had their way. When this is what the context, then this context presents itself again and again and again. Ethan, I ask you this. This is more of a policy thing. Why I ask Israel, all the years growing up, and I've been following Israel my whole life. We were told, or it was said, we were told, it was commonly argued that there will never be peace. Israel will never have peace with its Arab neighbors until there's a Palestinian state. That's not true. Israel has longstanding peace now with Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, certainly UAE's recent, but they do. Two things, Ethan, I really, really want to know. And I want it not to be this is the West has to deal with this. Why can't multiple Arab leaders and Arab nations, right, tend to this and make the Palestinians who lack leadership and always have, and I feel for the Palestinian people because they have suffered because of this. Why can't they help make this happen?
Well,
why is this?
I'm hoping they will ultimately. I think.
Where have they been? I'm just what I'm saying.
The Abraham Accords, where people, there are all kinds of arguments why that was. I think the basic thought behind that the paradigm was not working and it needed to be inverted, and the more productive collaboration between Israel and Arab states, the better, because everybody you need. Proximity, you need common interests. You have a common.
You know what? Nobody wanted to give Trump any credit. That's all that was.
Well, unfortunately, Trump. I actually I knew quite a bit about that, about how that came about, and basically Trump stumbled into it, and the Emiratis were quite clever in the way that they built.
Yes, but if that had been Joe Biden, he'd be getting a Nobel Peace Prize. That's all I'm saying. Which is fine. I'm not defending Donald Trump.
But Trump is not Joe Biden, and Biden.
Right, but the net effect is a peace accord with Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain. So I've got a great.
Yes, and we're on the, and one of the reasons this attack took place is because and this, I think this is indisputable, is that the political rabble rousers and assassins were afraid that the Saudis would come in and do a deal with Israel.
Well, I think that's certainly part of it. I don't know.
And of course, we don't know what's going to happen yet. In fact, there was an op-ed today by Bernard Hakel, who was making the argument that essentially at this point the Saudis will stick to a policy of a defined Palestinian state rather than some vague accommodation as their condition for peace, which may actually turn out to be if there's a slightly more reasonable Israeli government, maybe some chaos always produces possibilities, right? So we don't know what's going to happen.
Can I be incredibly fatalistic and grim?
Sure.
All right.
I'm not saying that's likely. I'm just saying that.
No, but I'm saying I just don't know. Listen, I don't like that Orthodox Jews leave Brooklyn and make Aliyah and go settle in the West Bank. Although I think the West Bank is occupied for a reason. There's a lot of history reason that because of Gaza and it's close to Israel. Okay, but and I don't know that it's tenable, but that's another story. I don't know that land for peace ever will work.
I would probably agree with you. I think the real thing here is diffusing this. And the irony again, it's sort of like the definition of anti-Semitism. Jews and Arabs have, for long periods of time actually lived together with some degree of equanimity, and they have to live together. Israel is key to, and for God's sake, we should all be worrying about climate change, not fighting each other and committing atrocities. I mean, that's the reality. At some point, either we're going to be climate change.
No argument there. No argument there. I mean, I don't have an argument there.
So I don't know. I mean, you know.
There's just no Arab. Let
me just respond to your previous question.
Yeah.
The Arab world has a massive deficit of leadership. There's no doubt about it.
Okay.
I mean, you can, and they have their own reasons, and we have their own reasons as to why that may be the case. Just as one can describe what the evolution of the Israeli state to the place it's in, from Rabin, who is someone I respected tremendously, to what we've got now. The question is, can humans, and I think the climate change analogy is also strong here, somehow manage to short circuit their primal desire to decimate the other tribe and steal their cattle, and put in place? I mean, I think the thing that worries me most about the America's decline in influence, which I think I tie directly to its over response to Bin Laden and 9/11. Is that there's no one else. I mean, who are we looking to for global responsibility now? Russia?
Listen, no. I'm with you on America being the global superpower. I don't disagree with that. But and by the way,
the Palestinian issue is drawing the United States. People keep saying, "Oh, the Middle East is irrelevant." The Middle East has been responsible for probably.
Who says it's irrelevant? I've not heard anybody irrelevant. Who said that?
Well, of course, the Obama administration that Biden, had this whole we're pivoting away from the Middle East. We're going to, put those conflicts pick and choose.
Sorry, right? Obama's second term was such a disaster on almost every foreign policy front. Don't get me started. I voted for him. I mean, ridiculous. Please, from Syria to Russia to the Iran, the whole thing. I mean, he's just, listen, Joe Biden deserves a lot of credit on Ukraine and a lot of credit in his leadership here. I think he's been actually really superb on the global stage.
And I hope he can convert that into something positive. What's the point of standing behind Israel if you can't at some point say broker some kind of the problem is I don't fully trust that the international system is whole enough to allow the United States to actually broker something.
So I'm asking, I'm not arguing. There's really no world where, maybe obviously the U.S. is always involved because we're a hegemon, but we're just, despite there being a deficit in leadership, that the Arab world could help negotiate something here. There's just no way that could happen.
No, I mean, I was very hopeful that the Saudis really want. I mean, you've got the Saudi leader, you've got, of course, the leadership and the people, and of course, part of the reason that that many of the Arab countries are not willing to help the Palestinians is that every time they've absorbed some of them, those groups, those violent, the political and guerrilla factions of those groups use their own people as hostages and then try to overthrow those governments. So,
correct. I understand. Right, and also, and now we don't have
every single Arab or Palestinian as they're victim of their circumstances. Some of them are active.
They're victim of this death cult, right? I mean, the people of Gaza are being held hostage by Hamas.
Nobody disagrees that Hamas, political Islam has been something, and this is another thing that I touched on in great detail in my book, is that the West has been sort of blinders on. We kept thinking that political Islam was something we could befriend and alter and shape the way that we wanted.
Dara,
and
to Ethan's point, his book is great because his book is not, Benghazi's a great book. I mean, you really do make that point, and you are unafraid about it. Meaning a lot of people in this debate, remember, we need a task force on Islamophobia. That's what we got to focus on right now. Anyway, right? No, I'm making your point, Ethan, that we have to talk about political Islam, and Dara saying that. I think we're all converging here. I do agree. I think, and by the way, we don't have time to do a history of the Shia-Sunni thing that's also enveloping this whole region. So that also plays into the geopolitical stratagems, et cetera, right? Which, apart from Israel, have a lot to do with who hates who and who doesn't want, who's a bulwark against Iran and what does Egypt really want? And they hate Muslim Brotherhood, which is a Hamas cousin. Again, we don't have time to go through the history of the Arab world, but we do all converge on, as I said, in my notes to you guys previous to the show, can there be? How can there be? I'm not talking about peace with the Arab world. Israel has several of those agreements. Peace with the Palestinian people who deserve it, who have paid a dear price for this. When you are fighting, I'm going to use your term, political Islam. I love that. I know Islamofascism is a little bit hyperbolic, but it isn't, because it is real. I mean, it was used in a sort of divisive way in the early aughts, but it is actually Islamofascism if you think about it.
The problem, of course, is that if you want to call that Islamofascism, has encouraged other forms of, American and Israeli political extremism, which is, and the whole thing feeds itself all over again.
Right, but I think the one thing that's different between America and Israel is they're not death cults. Okay, you criticize them all you want; they're not death cults.
That was what I meant when I said, like, at the end of this, Netanyahu is going to be voted out of power.
Right. He's an asshole.
Out of power.
Well, okay, but thank God, because basically he was on the road to creating a dictatorship, and his wife was blaming protests.
To be voted out of power, thank God. But it's going to be, there will be an election, right? That's what, to Adam's point,
that may be
Israel is not a death cult.
That may save.
Neither is America.
Actually, I would argue that Netanyahu actually is represents a death cult of trying to push Israel into suicide.
Well, he didn't succeed, and now he's got.
Thank goodness for that. We can develop Palestinians, I guess.
Thank God he didn't succeed.
But I think we're all basically in agreement that.
Yes.
I mean, how can I be more vocal against anti-Semitism?
But Ethan.
Yeah.
I don't doubt your moral clarity. If I did, I would have never had you on the show originally. I love your moral clarity, but I guess I come at it from one place, Dara comes to the other. It doesn't mean you're not providing the answer to the future of Middle East detente here. I'm just saying you have an expertise in it. And what is Israel supposed to do? It's nice to say ceasefire, get hostage. What do they do? How do they? Netanyahu's gone. It's Lapid or somebody else. And what? That it's neighbors in Gaza and the West Bank, or suddenly, okay, well, Mahmoud Abbas is going to rise to the occasion. I'm just saying, we know there's no leadership. So it's like Israel has no choice but to do, in my opinion, what it's done for 75 years, which is assume a healthy, vigorous posture of self-defense.
Which, unfortunately, was not the case. It completely failed. And I hope the Israeli people take Netanyahu absolutely to account for that, because it should never have happened.
Right. Dara, do you want to weigh in here before we wrap up?
I mean, just to say that there is something a little deeper that's going on here with the sort of, that makes it almost impossible to talk about, to talk about this in terms of geopolitics, which is this irrational motivation, which I guess, if Ethan's preferred term for that in this context, political Islam, maybe that's the right term. I don't know. I'm not a policy expert. But if that's the term, it is consistent with the irrational responses that we've seen that are not being done, I don't think, by people who would call themselves, affiliated with political Islam in the West. I mean, if you talk about these, people on, whether it's college campuses, not just college campuses. I mean, there was an elderly Jewish man who was just killed at one of these by one of these protesters who clubbed him over the head with a megaphone. I mean, there is an irrational. I mean, this isn't right? This is an over-the-top irrational hatred that where you're tearing down pictures of babies, hostage babies. I mean, it's an absolutely irrational response, and that irrationality, I do think, has a through line with the irrationality of the whether we want to call it political Islam or death cult. And I'm not saying that the through line is not we agree with about political Islam. The through line is the Jews are the cause of all our problems and evil in the world. That is the through line between that with anti-Semitism. And it is irrational, and it's very hard to sort of wrap your head around it, especially when you're used to thinking about things in terms of people taking, geopolitical actors acting in their own self-interest. Sometimes this isn't even in people's self-interest. I mean, Hamas probably screwed itself with this attack. That's another way of looking at it, is that they
how you interpret their goals and their motives. They may find that they've actually done this brilliantly. What they want is to enrich is financial and political, and to continue their whatever you want to call.
Right.
But what I'm trying to get at is that there is an irrationality to the vitriol is irrational, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
It isn't a response to things that Israel or the Jewish community are doing. And
I need to disaggregate this into multiple levels. Everyone thinks that their cause, and I'm certainly not, again, I don't want to be misunderstood here, but everybody thinks that their cause is from the Palestinians, the Arabs, the evangelical Christians. Everyone thinks that their cause is the most important thing on the agenda. When in fact, in a global sense, there are many more conflicts, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if we're looking at just that dynamic, gets a disproportional amount of attention because it's got more eyes on it than anything else, and it's in a very geostrategic position and has a tremendous effect on the rest of the world. What's going on college campuses is a phenomenon which I think is detrimental on all kinds of levels. I mean, basically, they may be the ones who the radical left, maybe the force like Nader back in 2000 that causes the Democrat to lose the next election, and we get Trump. I mean, these are the forces that we need to be looking at here, not focusing only on. I mean, certainly, I fully appreciate. No one's really talking about the growth of anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe. That seems to be going off the charts. But we're talking about Hamas here, which is mainly a political conflict.
I think that since we've reached the end, I think we can agree on this: the world's oldest hatred is anti-Semitism, and not only endures, it is much worse and been uncloaked in a way I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. Number two, the erosion of American influence in the Middle East has not been helpful here. Neither has the Netanyahu government, and the intractable problem of trying to find peace in that region plagues us continually. But I do think it can be said that despite this cul-de-sac, we're here talking about it. People are debating it. And I will say this as a free speech absolutist. I am so glad. I hate it, Dara, and I hate it, Ethan. But I want to hear I want to hear their filth. I want to see this doxing. I love it. I want to see this person, I mean, in terms of private companies, not governments. Someone goes out there and they're going to rip posters of Hamas. I want to know their name. No, I mean, because it's really rife. And so I'd rather know. I don't want to pretend. We're not sleepwalking anymore.
And I hope that I assume there are organizations that are developing statistics that actually can demonstrate for everyone to see exactly what impact. Because otherwise, talking about it in general ways, that after 9/11,
I know, but here's the thing: 400. The anti-Semitic attacks have increased more than 400% since
of
October.
Course.
So we know this data. So what I mean is, it'll get worse, probably, sadly, and we do know that. I'm not saying you disagree. I'm saying that I think we all have we're all going to find ourselves in kind of a larger ideological, not a human bind, but an ideological bind. Because these are very, very difficult things because to Dara's point, it's irrational. To your point, it's intractable. And so I don't know if those twain will meet.
And if again, what I'm really worried about at this point is that the so-called radical left will convince enough people to vote against or not vote, that we'll get Trump again. And then who knows? Maybe we'll get another peace agreement.
Maybe we'll get right on that. No, you never know. By the way, on that, before we go, I was going to tell everybody, for those that also, for further reading, people should read Karl Marx on the Jewish question. If they have any question about the deep anti-Semitic roots of Marx, who is the grandson of a Jew who became a Lutheran. I just wanted people to read that, know the depth of that anti-Semitism, because that plays in the college campuses and all that. To read Marx strictly as sort of economic, by any means necessary history is not enough. Anyway, Dara and Ethan, you both are friends of the show, and I love this vibrant debate. I like it when it's heated. I like it when it's cool. I like it when it's just right, and it was just right. So again,
it's a very important topic, and
it is, and it arouses passions from us all. I wish.
And again, Dara, I thought your op-ed was wonderful. So please don't.
Thank you. Thank you, and I appreciate hearing from you because there's definitely four-dimensional chess happening, and it's important for people to understand and know about it. So thanks for bringing your expertise to that too.
And to the audience, thank you for listening. Make sure if you haven't already, but because we've had Ethan several times, you've got to read his book Benghazi. You need to read Dara's book, People Love Dead Jews. Her recent October 22nd essay is also essential, Why Jews Cannot Stop Shaking Right Now. And thank you both for joining again, and a happy Thanksgiving, early Thanksgiving to you both.
Thank you.
And to the listeners, as always, stay dirty, stay moderate, and stay safe.